Hey everybody, it's Leeroy from Leeroy Gaming, and today I am bringing you the beginning of my coverage of Warhammer 40k Rogue Trader. This is coming from Owlcat Games. They are, of course, the makers of Pathfinder Kingmaker and Pathfinder Wrath of the Righteous. And so this is a giant RPG, extremely in-depth, and in today's video, we're going to talk about character creation, because in my experience, playing the beta and also the release version, I've put about 200 hours in, and I can definitely tell you, while this game does have a respec system, at the same time, it is very easy to mess up your builds as well, because you cannot respec everything. And I'll go over what you can and can't respec in this video. I'm going to give you some tips on how to create custom characters. And also, I will try and keep this as spoiler-free as possible, but I will point out some important things that you learn that would impact your character creation if you knew it right off the bat, but you don't find it out until partway into Act 1 and the beginning of Act 2. So all pretty early stuff, but stuff that you're going to wish you knew. So anyways, I hope you guys find this video helpful. I will put timestamps below. If you do find it useful, make sure to drop a like. Help with the algorithm by pointing out your comments below. I will be doing numerous videos, lots of different guided content. So if you want to learn about anything in particular, do let me know in the comments. And of course, if you want to see more RPG content from me, make sure to subscribe. Now, without further ado, let's go and take a look at character creation for Warhammer 40k Rogue Trader. Alright guys, we're going to go ahead and start by looking here at the first step, where you do have the option of having a pre-generated character, but what we're going to be looking at are the custom characters. Now I do want to point out, you may notice my mouse is a little different. This is the yellow mouse. You can find it on Steam. I think this will help make a lot of things I'm pointing out much more visible. So if you do like this slight adjustments, let me know in the comments. I can always use the regular mouse, but those are always a little harder to see, especially on the cell phone. So, custom creation. I want to point out right off the bat, this is kind of a cool thing that the game does its best. If you select a specific portrait, it will try and make the character look like that portrait, and that's pretty neat. So it does a better job on some than the others, but it's pretty interesting. Now, here's the thing I want to say right off the bat. This game lets you, in order, choose appearance, then it's going to have you choose your homeworld, an origin, triumph, darkest hour, archetype, characteristics, void, and then a void ship. Here's the tricky part. If you go in this very order, you may not know what in the world is going on, because the reality is you need to know about the characteristics and the archetypes. The archetypes are basically like the classes, and characteristics are the stats. And everything revolves around those two items. And then depending on your homeworld, you're going to have access to certain features, which are basically like feats from the previous games they made, and also adjustments to your stats. So it is a little weird throwing somebody in and having them pick the elements of the homeworld and the origin when they don't even know what kind of character they want to build. So what I'm going to be doing here as the intro, I will be actually pushing through, and we're going to start by looking at the characteristics. That means I'm going to pick just one of the random archetypes at first, and we will work our ways backwards. So that's my little disclaimer for starting this. I'm going to explain to you the importance of the stats, and then I'm going to go over the archetypes, and then we will talk about how the different choices you make there will be supported by your homeworld choices and your origin choices. The triumphs and darkest hours are kind of thematic, but they don't impact your stats at all. All right, so we're starting here looking at stats. Now do note that baseline, all start at 30. But as you can see here, some of them are 35, some are 25. In this case, willpower is 30. That's because I have gone ahead and just randomly chosen a homeworld and origin. Those will give you pluses and minuses to the stats. Now, you have to understand the stats because they will impact what kind of build you're going to want to do. Weapon skill and ballistic skill are unique because they're not going to impact any of your skills. So these stats, weapon skill and ballistic skill, are purely based around the type of attacks you're going to want to do. So obviously, if you're going to be doing a melee build, you want high weapon skill, and ballistic skill is for range attacks. Now, I'm not going to go over what every stat does completely, because you can read that here, and the game does a good job of explaining as well. But I do want to point out that there's not enough points in the game to be kind of a good quality jack of all trade. You're going to want to specialize. So you're going to be picking, are you doing melee attacks? Are you doing ballistic attacks? Or you could, in theory, do a bit of a support build or a psyker build that doesn't necessarily rely on either of those. Now, the other stats will impact different skills. And these are all your skills from athletics, awareness, carouse, etc. I will point out some important elements of this in just a second. But let's go ahead and look at the base skills first. So strength. What do you need to know about strength? Well, first of all, it is going to impact only athletics directly. And athletics is important because it will impact certain skill checks in the world in the game. Like if you want to jump over an obstacle or basically clear some rubble, you need to have at least one. Now, do know when it comes to these stats coming up here, you basically want to make sure that you have at least one character that has a good strength and good, or at least good athletics, for example. Having low to moderate skills is not very helpful. You really do need to have people specialized in the skills like athletics, for example. Now, the other thing to note about strength, it talks about how it impacts your damage, but that's not the most impactful thing for character creation. There are certain breakpoints. For example, if you have 35 strength, you can get a feature, aka a feat later on in the game, that will give you plus 25 when it comes to the equivalency for heavy weapons. So heavy weapons do require 60 strength equivalent. You don't need to bump it up to 60. You can use that one feat and it will subtract 25 from the requirements. So basically what you need to know is if you want to use big two-handed ranged weapons like the heavy bolters, etc., you need to make sure you have at least 35 strength. The other threshold is 45 strength if you want to have heavy armor. Again, the game does not tell you this right off the bat. This is not 45 strength including modifications from armor. This needs to be just straight up strength that you can either set at the beginning of the game, or as you level up, you will have opportunities to put strength up. So again, 45 is the threshold if you want to have heavy armor. Now, toughness does two things. Number one, it's going to just impact how much health you have, and also your carouse skill, which basically just makes it so you can resist negative effects like debuffs, etc. If you're going to be a frontline tank, this is something that's you're going to want to pump up. The melee characters, or classes rather, will have abilities that scale off of toughness, similar to how other abilities will scale off of strength or maybe weapon skill or ballistic skill. So toughness is not just health and resistances. You can make a build that will heavily rely on having a high toughness skill. Now, agility, very, very important. If you're going to want to specialize in demolition, agility is going to be important. You can, of course, pump a demolition itself. And then agility is also important because there will be numerous skills that will give you extra movement, for example, depending how much agility you have. It does, as the descriptors say, increase your initiative. So that's how early you go in turn order. It's going to increase your dodge also, which is important if you're going to have light or medium armor. If you go heavy armor, there's going to be a big like 50% debuff on your dodge. So that's not as important. Now, intelligence is interesting because, yes, as you can see here, it is related to the most amount of skills, but there is also a class that has a lot of abilities that will scale off intelligence. With that being said, unless you're going to be that class or you really want to lean into being a skill monkey of sorts, you can keep your intelligence lower. So if you're going to be just like a gunner, or you're going to be a melee combatant, you can actually have this lower. So you're either going to specialize in it or probably have it be a dump stat. Now, perception is interesting because it does impact awareness, and you need to have at least one person that's going to have really high awareness in your group so that you can spot traps, for example. It can also make it so enemies have a harder time dodging your attacks. So again, if you're going to be like a sniper or a bit of a scout, perception can also be very, very important. But you do not have to have all your characters have high perception. If you're, for example, just like a melee character attacking, having high weapon skill can compensate for having a low perception, for example. Now, willpower is interesting because if you're going to be a psyker, which is basically like a caster in this game, this is super important. But it's also a secondary factor in a variety of abilities that some of the support characters and classes have, where they're going to combine your willpower stat with fellowship and sometimes intelligence. Those get mixed around. So again, if you're going to be having your main character be a little bit more basic beginner build, like again melee or range attacker, you could probably have this lower. And then finally there's fellowship. Fellowship's interesting because you definitely want to have at least one character of really high fellowship. I will say that there are numerous companions that are built to have high fellowship. So for you as a main character, this definitely can be a dump stat in most cases. There is a type of build where you can be a tank that also has a high fellowship to kind of support the people around you defensively. So you could utilize fellowship, but I would say it's definitely a more advanced build, or if you're gonna be going with one of the support classes. So that's what you need to know as far as the functionality of the stats. Now, the other thing I have to mention to you here, and it's a minor spoiler but not a surprise, and it has to do with your Voidship. So again, you have your Voidship, but pretty early in the game, you're going to get to take your characters and have them have positions on the ships. And this is very important. Basically, you're going to need to have 6 different characters, one with one skill that is specialized for each. And so you want to plan for this, whether your main character is going to be one of these individuals. So you need to have one character in your party that has really high persuasion, one character that has really high demolition, one character that has really high tech use, one that has really high athletics, one that has lore warp really high, and one that has really high awareness. As long as you have yourself or another character in your party have maxed out stats in each of those, then you're going to have all the appropriate roles for your Voidship. And again, the game does not tell you this in advance, so plan your character accordingly. Alright, now that you understand characteristics, aka stats, we're going to take a step back and we're going to help you pick your archetype, which are basically your classes. And what's important to note is that you will basically get to make 2 different choices when it comes to classes. So you basically are auto multi-class in this game, and there's a third kind of auto class you have that you don't make a choice about. But exemplar, just note these are kind of, you're going to have feats and stat increases that can be used to specialize your character at the very highest level to kind of make them extra tanky or extra good at range or extra good at melee, etc. So there's not much of a choice there. But at level 1, you will get to pick from one of 4 options, and they're going to be very important because, as you can see here, depending on which option you choose, you're going to have 3 other options you get to choose when you level up. Now, the warrior is pretty much the most straightforward. This is kind of like a focusing on melee combatant. Now, I do want to point out, when you level up, and you level up pretty quick in this game, you're going to swap between being able to get bonuses to skills, you're going to unlock unique abilities, and then later on, you're going to get to pick kind of like ultimate abilities, or not really pick, but you're going to unlock ultimate abilities, and then you're going to have talents, which are basically feats from other games, and there's a variety of different feats. Some may have to do with your homeworld, with your origin, with your class choices, etc. And then you can alternatively increase your stats as well. So this is what you're going to see as you level up. I'm not going to go in depth about this in this video, but I want to kind of give you a quick look at what you're going to have, as all your choices earlier will impact this. So warriors, what do you need to know about them? If you're going to play a warrior style, you're definitely going to want to make sure you have your weapon skill be nice and high. And you can kind of see here, even though it's kind of gray, I don't know why they make it so hard to read. You may not be able to see it, but it says they're big about weapon skill, strength, toughness, and agility. Now, agility is good for all fighters, but especially those if you're going to go light or medium armor. If you go heavy armor, you're going to have a strong debuff to agility. So you could, in theory, have a frontline warrior that is lower agility. You're going to go later in the turns, but you're going to be able to have higher toughness, so higher health, higher strength, etc. It also tells you what skills you tend to focus on, and they can, they'll be kind of have the medic lines. They can do demolition, athletics, basically very frontline tanky, doing things to resist getting damaged. They kind of self-heal as well, potentially. So this is a really good starter archetype, and then you'll either get to be an assassin, vanguard, or arc militant. Now, vanguard is the most traditional if you end up going down that route, and there's a video, because we're just starting out, I'm not going to go in depth on the vanguard, but just it really leans into the tankiness. Arc militant allows you to hybridize, and where you not only do melee but do ranged attacks, and there's a variety of abilities that you will unlock that, for example, if you swap constantly between melee, ranged attacks, AoE attacks, single target attacks, you're going to get stacking buffs that increase both your ability to hit with melee as well as ranged. While assassin is a little bit more advanced, and I don't recommend assassin for beginners. You can stack a bunch of debuffs to be very effective at killing single targets, for example. It's an interesting build, but I think it combos a little bit better with operatives innately, and we'll talk about them in a second. Although you can definitely do a warrior assassin, but that will be a little bit more of a advanced playstyle. Now, officer is your support class. If you're going to do officer, I do want to give a couple of tips. There are two amazing companions that are both super powerful, and I would say they're gonna be able to, because of some of the features that are unique to the characters, gonna be more powerful than you can be as a player character. So unless you really want to be an officer, or if you want to go heretical down to like the evil side, because I did not find any companions that were officers that were heretical. If you want to roleplay that heavily, then I guess you could be an evil officer. But the main thing here is that you're going to lean into buffing other characters and even getting them to do other attacks. So it's very viable to have an officer that doesn't attack at all themselves. Although you can make a build that does attack and support, but it's not as min-maxed. And you'll notice here, they're all about willpower and fellowships. I talked about this in the characteristics section. This is the class that would lean into that setup. Now, this allows you to, again, go Vanguard, Master Tactician, or Grand Strategists. Master Tactician and Grand Strategist are going to be different ways of, again, controlling and supporting the battlefield. It utilizes some more advanced tactics that you probably have never seen in other RPGs. And again, will warrant its own videos, but it's advanced playstyles. You can actually play the game without these roles at all and do perfectly fine, and your gameplay will be less complicated. If you go Vanguard, that's like a frontline supporter that is also tanky. It's going to be basically, think of it as a giant shield. Their offense is not going to be there. It's more about soaking up damage, taunting, supporting other people, and letting them do the damage. So I don't know if it's nearly as fun for new players, but I could see on higher difficulties, you could kind of min-max this to have them be the ultimate tank and then have the other classes do the damage. Operative is interesting as well. They're big on utilizing intelligence and perception. So the traditional sniper will be an operative. You are going to have abilities to debuff the enemy so that attacks against them from you and other players will do more damage, for example, or they'll have lower defenses, etc. So it's more of a thinking man's class. Definitely you can play with a melee playstyle as well, but you will notice that a lot of the skills innately will lean you towards playing a ranged character, and more specifically a sniper character. There is a companion that is an amazing ranged operative. Don't want to spoil it, so don't feel pressure like you need to be the sniper in the team. If you want to have a really good sniper, probably the best natural sniper in the game is somebody you can get relatively early. Now, soldier is the opposite of the warrior. So the warrior had the abilities to kind of charge in, do all the heavy melee. Well, soldiers are all about ranged attacks. And they can also, earlier than anybody else, get multiple attacks using the run and gun ability. But it's all about just shooting, whether it's single attack, burst fire, area attack. If you want to have a ranged class that utilizes a lot of guns, whether they're heavy weapons, you can also specialize them to be a sniper pretty effectively as well. Or if you're gonna go into that hybrid build of melee and ranged, but you want to lean in more into the ranged, well, soldier is a good place to start. So you'll notice that the soldier and the warrior were the two classes that can be arc militant. So there's two different type of combos you can go into that. The one that's going to do a bunch of ranged and sometimes melee, which is this, or the opposite was the warrior of the arc militant was the melee that will do range as they approach enemies, for example. And again, they can combo with bounty hunter and master tactician. Bounty hunters, I am looking forward to making a video on them as well, but they tend to mark multiple targets as bounties, and they can get a lot of benefits for killing those bounties off. It's a very, very fun playstyle. But again, I would say the natural ways to play the soldier is either going arc militant or bounty hunter. Master tactician is a more advanced playstyle. But with this one, you're going to want to definitely have ballistics, probably perception, awareness. That's all going to be big. All right, now that we're done with archetypes, I do want to point out that both Darkest Hour and Triumph are kind of roleplay related. Doesn't have any stats or skills related to it. So what we want to look at are Origins and Homeworlds, but we will start with Homeworlds. Now, the big thing to note here is this is how you can kind of customize your character to that next level. With that being said, each one of these does tend to lean into certain playstyles more than others, and I'll explain how. With that being said, you can mix any of the archetypes of any of the homeworlds, but some will be way more min-maxed than others. So, for starters, outside of the little story here, each one of these homeworlds will give you a feature, and this is kind of like a feat. Then it's going to impact your stats, your characteristics, in positive and negative ways. And then, very importantly, it's not going to give you these talents. It will give you access to these talents as you level up, so you can choose to pick them. And if it fits your build, awesome. If not, you may not pick up any of these potentially. So, what is the focus? Well, Death Worlds, in a nutshell, is really good for melee builds. You'll notice it leans into strength and being kind of like a frontline fighter or tank. It can help out as well. The feature is very tanky related. and the talents also just focus in on melee for the most part. Now, Voidborn is a little different. Voidborn, you get a character early on that is a Voidborn. They tend to be kind of, I don't want to necessarily say supernatural, but definitely alien in nature. So again, you can see if you're going to focus on willpower and intelligence based, this can be utilized. The feature is defensive, but it can also make it so that the enemy is less defensive. So Voidborn is interesting. You definitely want to read through all these and see if it fits your style. It is a little less traditional with the talents. So I would say for some advanced specialized builds, this could be a good homeworld, but not for beginners. Hiveworld is all about building a character or a team that's going to be very, very close together. Do be very careful though. If you tend to bunch up all your characters, the AI is pretty good at using AoE attacks to make you pay for that. But you'll notice pretty much everything from the feature to the talents are going to really benefit on being together or outnumbering enemies. And again, the stats are okay. They're very non-committal to any specific build type, ranged or melee, just mainly about swarming the enemy. Forge World is a little unique because you actually get to specialize in one of 3 different types of Forge Worlds, and it'll give you one of 3 different benefits. Either going to make you more tanky, going to make you more mobile, or make it so that you crit more. So you can be very mechanically tanky, as I'll call it here. Some of the talents are really good for that, like Steel of the Forge. If you're going to focus on heavy armor, it can make you more tanky, but the most important is makes you immune to falling prone. That's important because if you get knocked down, basically knocked prone in this game, you lose a turn, a complete turn, to stand up. Other benefits that really stand out on this is if you want to ignore fellowship but want to still be able to get some fellowship skills higher, you can get calculated relationship that lets you utilize strength instead of fellowship for persuasion, coercion, and commerce. So this can be very, very interesting. Also, if you're going to want to focus on using plasma, melta, or power weapons, you can up your damage because of the int. So this is another way to leverage intelligence into offensive benefits or defensive benefits, as you can see here. So it's a unique style. There's a couple of ways to build it, but the idea is you're going to be tough, kind of probably heavy weapon and tech based, but at the same time also leaning into intelligence at the same time. So not a pure tank, not a pure ranged, but this interesting mishmash of intelligence combined with that, which is not traditional because most of your ranged or melee builds will not utilize intelligence. They'll probably have that be really, really low. So it's a unique playstyle. Imperial World is very versatile. You'll notice there's not much here, and I don't know if this is intentional like this, but basically it lets you get plus 10 to any of your characteristic except for weapon skill and ballistic skill. And then a lot of this is being kind of anti-Xenos or like pro-Imperium. So benefits for Imperial characters, or if you're the only Imperial character, you can get additional benefits to be more efficient, and being kind of anti-Xenos, anti-demonic. And Xenos, by the way, in this game is anything that is non-human, so alien. So basically alien or demonic, you get really good benefits against them. So this is, if you are going to go for that kind of style, very good. Otherwise, it may be too narrow to be as universally useful. And then finally you have Fortress World, which is the opposite of Death World. So if you want to be range based, ranged attacks, this is a pretty solid one. You have ways of proccing an ability to have a free extra attack at the beginning of your round, and pretty much all the talents will support that to get these specific stacks of never stop shooting that can increase the chance of proccing that at the beginning of the round. So you can really lean into that. And the stats, again, perception is good for ranged, willpower is good for defense. So those are the different homeworlds. And now we have origins. And so this is, yes, it's RP wise, but it's more than just RP benefits. You are going to get unique features, character modifications, and also access to more talents as well, similar to the homeworlds. Again, I'll kind of mouse over this here for you. They have different styles. So the Arca Militarum Commander, big thing here. Regimental Tactics is the big feature here. Do note that all origin features you can only use once per combat. So this is big about buffing allies that are near you. You can see the stats get buffed here. Do note character modifiers that are listed here. These are additional modifiers that you'll get access to as you level up. They're not automatic, just like the talents are not automatic. Commissar is all about, again, buffing the performance of other characters. Obviously, it goes well with the officer class. And you notice here, your attacks either debuff enemies or buff allies. This is why you're going to see Fellowship stat being buffed. But you can also yourself be leaning into a melee build as well. And the talents will really lean into different ways that you can buff your allies whenever you use that ability. Again, do note, these can only be used once per combat. So it's a pretty big commitment to buff an ability that is used so sparingly. But again, you do want to look at the characteristic modifiers for this. Crime Lord is interesting. You can utilize it on intelligence builds. Perception, remember, is good for ranged attacks or weapons skills. What I will say is this is actually an interesting background if you want to do a combination, kind of a melee and ranged build potentially. These stats really feed into that as well. And again, you can get some variety of benefits to the well-laid plan. If you strategically use the surefire plan at the right time, you can really boost your temporary damage for that round or defense as well. So very, very versatile how you use this. Ministerium Priest, this is a very defensive origin. So War Hymn is very defensive. It really leans into willpower. This is a way to increase your defense against void attacks and just defense in general, even if you're not going to be a psyker. So you can have a frontline fighter that also can kind of defend and get additional boosts based on your willpower. So Shield of Faith is a good example. You get armor against attacks of demons and warp damage, and also increases your resolve. And then you can also get here the Emperor's Protection. Just you have an increased percent chance to ignore any damage. So again, very defensive. You can either lean that in into a character that already utilizes willpower a lot for other reasons, or just mix it in with a traditional class like a ranged shooter or a melee fighter to make it more tanky. Navy Officer is really good for tanky classes, period. Brace for Impact basically makes you more tanky and people near you tanky. Fellowship is not required for melee tank classes, although I will say there are some feats and abilities that allow you to support and buff people around you, and those are based off Fellowship. So if you want to be a supportive tank, then the Navy Officer is really, really good for that. And it's got decent stats for it as well. And obviously ways to buff that main ability here as well. Noble is kind of unique because You Serve Me allows you to pick one other character per combat, and they're going to be your servants. And when you buff them, they're going to get additional benefits, and your interactions with them will be buffed. So there's a mutually beneficial relationship here between you and that servant. That servant can be different every time you go to a different combat if you want. And there's very specific ways of buffing those interactions here under talents, as you can see here. So if you really want to lean into buffing that other person on top of your officer abilities, if you go down that route archetype, this can be work really, really well. And not surprisingly, fellowship buffed here. Persuasion, again, a lot of people skills and intelligence as well. So really great for that officer build. And then finally we have Sanctioned Psyker. This is probably the most impactful of all of these origins. This is the only way you can be a Psyker. And it's a Sanctioned Psyker, which is the more controlled of the two. You will get early, at the very beginning of the game actually, a companion that's an unsanctioned Psyker. Those are a little bit more chaotic. They can do more damage technically, but they can also cause more chaos to stir. And we'll talk about that in a different video. But it does give you the access to your Psi rating. It starts at 0. So at level 1, you're not going to be casting a bunch of spells. But as you can see here, you can get up to Psi rating 4. Lots of different ways to buff your offensive or supportive and defensive Psyker abilities. Obviously, you're going to get access buffs to willpower, also toughness, lower warp. So you can definitely become an offensive Psyker or defensive Psyker. If you want to be like a cleric, the best way to do that, like an offensive paladin cleric, you can actually be a warrior combined with a sanctioned Psyker and just choose the abilities that will heal and buff your team as opposed to going offensive. So there are your homeworlds and your origins. Now, if you follow this process, you basically have everything you need. To recap, you're going to want to start by identifying the characteristics you really want to lean into on your main character. Pick an archetype that will play nice with that, and then work backwards and support the homeworld and origin that will hopefully min-max that playstyle for you. Again, Triumph and Darkest Hour or roleplay only. And then you're going to get to pick your Voidship, which is mainly cosmetic. We'll go over that in a different video. And there goes your character. So, again, I hope that the things I went over here you found helpful. If you did, make sure to drop a like. If you have any other questions about character creation or tips, let me know. There's a lot of ways to build out characters in this game. Some of them can be really powerful and min-maxed, but there's also a lot of ways to make really gimpy characters. So hopefully what I've discussed here with you will help you go down the road of having more efficient characters. I'll be making more in-depth videos about the different sections here, but I think this is a good start. If you want to see more content about Rogue Trader, make sure to subscribe, leave a note in the comments for the algorithm with any questions and feedback. As always, thank you for all the support, guys, and I'll see you in the next video.